These are so
Expenditures.
Oh, grandma. Well, Fred came back at the end of the operating week. And we got that.
I do.
No, I'm just like, I don't get it. I understand now.
Yes, it is. At work, it's really.
Well, yeah.
That makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as I know.
This whole big thing,
We're busy. Like this one, of course, everybody's probably. I don't know what's around.
reasons well, but you can take that over to anyway.
On the weekends.
They're here.
Farther west side. Couldn't believe it. It is. I feel my shoulders. I didn't feel it yesterday. I'm like, shit. Today, lower back, like slits over my.
Were you style or something?
Baseball and stuff like that.
Yeah. Where did Will
Matt, you said thin crowd.
What? Until I got here. They followed me. The procession. Pied Piper, lead men. Years ago, should have locked the door.
Oh, I might have a problem.
Really?
Set the pad over that lead.
Well.
Chief. Oh, yeah, I just need to get a couple more chairs in case more people scatter. Clear.
Oh, those are the companies that
That means I won't be. You may not trade.
Sorry, I talked to you there. I was on the phone. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Just in case.
All right, everybody, 7 o'clock, hopefully everyone's here. Let's all rise, do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Al Dyke. Here. Nancy Rondell.
Here.
John Cups. Here. Matt Bagheera.
Here.
John Leo.
Here. Good. Citizens comment tonight is something that's not on the agenda, or it's not about the budget. Now's your chance. Yes, sir.
Okay, Todd Smigelski, live on 3rd Street. You guys talked last time about a check from Emmett County not being sent over from revenue sharing.
Yeah, TIF funds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did a little research on that. It turned out that the state is telling the county not to send that money. So what is going on is there is an audit that was filed by the city a couple of weeks ago for 2019. And then that removed the first delinquency notice for not filing an audit. And then there's a second requirement for revenue sharing, and that's called a Form F-65 that has to be filed.
Correct.
Okay, and there's a delinquency notice for that also?
Yes, and I can explain the reason why. The TIF is a little separate project than that,
Okay,
but during COVID, we were right in the midst of our 2019 and 2020 audit. So I've contacted the state. They are delinquent. The 2019 was filed. Our auditors are right now finishing the F-65, which will be filed hopefully this week.
for 2019 or
And then
2020?
2019 and then 2020, they are coming to finish 2020's audit in the end of January.
End of January. Okay,
But if I can preface that slightly, the TIF situation has been going on for 5 years. It's not revenue sharing, it's a capture of our taxing increment financing. And the county chose 5 years ago, we've gone to the Attorney General to ask them to make a decision, and the Attorney General has chosen not to.
okay. And for the TIF or the revenue share?
The TIF,
Right.
we don't collect revenue sharing from the county.
You're only doing TIF?
The TIF is what we would get, our DDA, that has nothing to do with the city, that is a DDA TIF capture.
Okay, and how come you're not doing revenue sharing?
We don't get money from the counties.
So you're not, the city doesn't participate in revenue sharing with the state?
We do, but that comes directly from the state.
Oh, okay. All right.
So the only monies that we get from the county are, I don't know, we get some money for the fire department, but we don't really get anything. The TIF is a totally separate thing besides revenue sharing. We do get our revenue sharing from the state.
Right, and so when I spoke to the state last, 2 days ago, I'm sorry, Thursday, they said that the first discrepancy was removed. Actually, when I was on the phone with them, they keyed it in.
Right.
But he said that the other one for the annual report is still.
The F-65.
Right, yes.
Correct,
Okay.
right, but that's part and parcel, that's different from the county.
All right, I just make
So
sure.
yes, but to give everybody a heads up on the audit, we've talked about it.
Okay.
COVID, our auditors weren't even coming in, we were closed,
Right,
so now we're playing catch up.
and you're still using Anderson up in.
Anderson, Tackman, yeah.
Yeah. And then also, they had a correspondence from the state to the city for delinquency on the pension plan also.
I don't know what that would be. I've not received a delinquency.
Okay, that one, July 19th and September 1st, it was a determination of underfunded status. They sent out 2 letters so that the pension plan is classified as underfunded.
Our pension plan is not fully funded. It's 60% or so, 62. And what the state then, now I'm assuming is what they'll want is a plan from us saying, here's what we need to do. to
Right,
get
they need
this
a
up.
corrective action plan.
Correct, CAP.
Right. By
And that's
February-
part and parcel of what our auditors do for
Right, and that's
us.
by February 1st.
Pardon?
By February, I think it's February 1st.
Right.
Right in there.
Right.
Okay.
So
So it's
any
all-
more of these types of questions, please call me or stop down.
Okay. Right.
But yes, that's any other questions about that, I can try to field them.
Right. And then the 2021 financial statements would need to be audited, and the due date for that is June 30th of this year.
Correct. So 2020, they told me I talked to Anderson Tackman, they want to come in the end of January, finish 2020s. 2021, we'll do the 1st of May, filed by June 30th, and then barring any situations with closures.
Yeah.
We're back on track.
The last difficulty with accounting, so that's why I started looking at it.
You know, the TIF thing is a totally,
Different than
we've
revenue.
been not feuding with it. We've had this discussion since 2010.
Okay. Right, that's it.
Any other citizens comment?
I don't know if this fits here. I'm almost afraid to speak up because every time I do, I'm told to be quiet. But in our city council meeting, your city council meeting last week, or the redevelopment meeting, whichever one it was recently, one of the proposals was that the city would remove lifeguards from the swimming area as part of the budget cuts, and we're talking budget, right? So is this the right time to talk about that, or is that after you guys have talked and then I talk?
We're gonna open up a public hearing on the budget, so that would be the appropriate time. to bring
That would be the other time. Okay, great. And the only other thing is the electrical grid thing that was discussed at the redevelopment meeting this past week about the amount of service that's going on with the electrical grid. And I was confused by how moving the substation area to this area would end up servicing better. So is that something that can be discussed now? Because that's part of the budget, right? Or is that, does that wait until then?
It's a big discussion. I think you would be better served to make an appointment with Victor and spend a half hour, 45 minutes getting educated on the electrical system.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Anything else for public comment? Good, I think we can move into the public hearing.
Motion second to
I'll
open.
make a motion to open the public hearing.
Sorry. Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
John Cobbs. Yep. Al Dyke,
Yes.
Matt Bugera.
Yes. Okay, before we get into this, we're gonna do a 3-minute time limit, so have your thoughts ready. No chatter between you people, direct the questions to the council table or Victor, and we'll do our best to answer. and expedite this. Okay. Who wants to start with the public side?
Why not? Yeah.
There we go. Start the timer.
All right, real quick. Has the city considered switching from a pension plan to a 401k style?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we have, and we're talking about it
Okay.
probably in the spring, but it's part of this planning process here. The pension plan, which you touched on before, is a defined benefit. which I'm sure you know.
Yep.
And municipalities are starting to veer away from that for multiple reasons.
And the state of Michigan did.
Right, and the county has it. So we've reached out to our retirement. I haven't heard anything back. They're gonna put together a package saying, okay, here's a hybrid plan option. Here's a more of a defined contribution plan, like a 401 type series, but I think it's 457 for governmental. On top of that, though, there's kind of a wait time because we have all of our employees are covered by 2 bargaining agreements, union contracts. So that's in these union contracts, it would have to be negotiated at that time.
Those union contracts are through
Expired in
2020.
2023. But yes, that's on the radar for sure.
It's a long process, but it does save on.
Yes, it does. And some headache, yes.
Anyone else? Okay. Could you state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Marilyn Early. I don't live in the city. My address is 6212 Emmett Heights Road, Harbor. I was the lifeguard supervisor at the City Beach for more than 20 years. And I think it would be a great disservice to the community if you get rid of the lifeguards. If you decide to get rid of the lifeguards, get rid of the raft. So many saves are made every summer when a kid swims out toward the raft, can't make it. An adult goes out to get the kid, can't make it. The lifeguards go make the save, and they save 2 people at once. So every summer for the past more than 20 years, I'd say easily 2 saves a month occur at the beach by the lifeguards. And I just don't think that's a place that you want to cut your budget.
In regards to the lifeguard situation, I feel the same way about that, and I'm concerned with pulling the lifeguard and now maybe potentially, pull the ramp too, and then the city attorney said you could put swim at your own risk signs, and that removes the city from any liability. If something should happen, swim at your own risk. So my curiosity is, since the boardwalk hasn't been surveyed or looked at by a structural engineer, just by the civil engineer, which is what benchmark is, has nothing to do with structural. And yet it's been deemed unsafe without any true value behind that. Why can't you open the boardwalk again and just put traverse at your own risk? And that removes the city of any liability. And
No, that's not true. So the lake is a natural area. The boardwalk is something we construct and maintain. So we have liability. We have a duty to maintain things that we create and build, whereas we didn't build the water was there. So that's just clarify that.
so maybe help me understand why a structural engineer hasn't looked at the boardwalk.
Council did not ask for a structural engineer, and they talked about this, I think, in 2018 as well, and decided that Benchmark decided when they surveyed it that it was already in such disrepair that it would be basically fruitless to have a structural engineer look at it.
I'm sorry, it would be what?
Basically fruitless.
Fruitless,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
But it's already, that was plainly obvious to them it was in disrepair.
But they're civil engineers. That's land surveying engineers. That's not a structural engineer.
And I believe at last council meeting, when council asked us to look at it, council did not just want a DPW to look at it. So that's a council decision to see if they want to look at a structural engineer.
I proposed it would be a good idea to have a structural engineer look at it, because maybe it needs just repair instead of completely tear it down, completely close it down, shut off one side, shut off the other side. Perhaps a structural engineer could look at it and advise on ways to repair it to make it structurally sound again, if indeed it is structurally unsound. But without that expertise, it seems like we're looking at huge expense to tear it down and rebuild it, and potentially it could be repaired, which would cost a significant amount of less money. So I'd like that to be on record.
Good, thank you. Sir,
I'm Greg Wheeler, 402 Perry Street, Harbor Springs. Thinking about the boardwalk, to me, I would like to suggest going with a concrete route. it's a lot less expensive and will last a whole lot longer. No matter what you do with wood, it eventually will fail.
So concrete.
Yeah, and it can help also support the side of the hill from. I don't know
Not
the right word.
necessarily.
Yeah, it would help support the hill.
Concrete walkway right there will destroy that hill.
Really?
They'll take all the trees out, everything will go away. Cheaper,
I didn't.
it'll be cheaper up front, but a concrete walkway will deteriorate. It'll fall apart. And maintenance on a concrete stairway, and trust me, it's my business,
Okay.
will, once the nosing on the concrete walkway starts to deteriorate, then you're patching. Go look at the city high school.
Okay.
Nosing on all the stairways, stairway of the football field, they're all deteriorating. It's a maintenance headache. It's easier to replace a chunk of wood than it is to patch the concrete nosing on a step.
Well, and the footings alone are more damaging, I think, for a full concrete structure, if I'm correct. The footings alone,
You would
You can
destroy
tear
the
and
entire,
pile.
well, for one, I don't think the city owns any of that property. A cement walkway, to do what the boardwalk is, they'll destroy that entire bluff. There'll be no trees, there'll be nothing there.
right, that's why I say that the piling from a post, like a wooden post, would be less invasive
And answer
to the hill.
Your thing, and I'm not a structural engineer, so I'm not gonna get into all that, but the pictures taken by Benchmark and Lucas and everybody else shows the old columns are about this big around. Today's world, we put columns in 2 foot or bigger to hold things like that. The vehicle piles have to be drilled down there to keep things from shifting over a period of time. So my general opinion, to get a structural engineer in there to do a survey would waste time and a lot of money.
Don't we have to worry about being at the Harbor Springs, that bluff, going too deep into that area of hitting any springs and so forth? With going
But
back
those helical piles and stuff like that, I don't believe so.
That side of the bluff's dry. It's the west bluff, it's the wet bluff.
Most of the springs are out the west end of town.
So we are talking about different efforts to come up with the funds, either grants or money raised or whatever, to come up with funds. So it would seem like it would be a good spend to have a structural engineer look at it, especially if the cost would be lessened by repairing or a better structure. It just seems like the offset would be worth it. I can't see that it doesn't.
Won't argue with it,
I
be
can't
worth
see
a
that
phone
it's
call,
not
but it's
beneficial
not
to
gonna
have a
be.
structural engineer actually look at it. It doesn't make sense to me that everybody's not an expert and eyeballing it and deciding what's going on with it. It just seems that it makes better sense to have a structural engineer.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement.
Thank you.
Look at it another day. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Lynn Vanford and I live at 7510 Cemetery. I am the current lifeguard supervisor of the beach, and in correlation with the boardwalk and liability, then that's clearly stated that we have created the raft, so there would be liability to the city if we leave that in and have no lifeguards, and I think it's a horrible decision. A lot of people rely on those lifeguards, so. And it's not only just the lifeguards, but it also creates jobs for our young community, so. But the raft should not stay if we do not have lifeguards.
Kathy Mata, 560 Sargent Street. I was looking at the waterfront fund part of the budget, and does the city determine its seasonal and transient dockage rates, or is that controlled by the state or anything?
So the seasonal is determined by our City Harbor Commission. The transient dockage rates, there's set rates that you can apply according to state guidelines. So we can pick anywhere certain rates. There's like A through H, and we can pick whatever rate we want to set, but the state sets those certain rates. So we can choose from a set standard the state has given
Are
us.
we at the high end of what the
We are-
state,
For the transient rates, we're almost at the high, one of the highest.
was that the seasonal rates? I guess I'm just thinking it's busy, there's a high demand.
So for the seasonal rates, that's we have no state guidelines to compare it to. We are typically in the ball range or a little bit higher than other marinas, if I'm right about that, Al.
We're the most expensive municipal marina on the Great Lakes.
Is it? Okay, okay. I was just, so I didn't see an increase between 21 and 22,
The
so I.
state sets a minimum seasonal rate
Mhm.
and a maximum transient rate.
Oh, I see.
So we have to work within those parameters.
Oh, okay, okay, so
And
you're,
and we're way above the minimum.
so you're concerned about raising it anymore?
But
Is
we
that what
did,
you're saying?
we did raise the seasonal by, was it 3% or I think it was 3% we raised it by. What you're probably looking at there is that we're estimating about what kind of business we'll get. And in 2020 and 2021, because of COVID, we had different kind of usership of our slips and our moorings. So we're doing our best guess to see what that increase will give us. So,
I understand, okay, thank you.
Anything else? Mulder?
I'm Bill Mulder, 372 West Summit Street. And I'm about to keep up the budget process, and I observed it last year and I'm observing it this year. And I've been impressed, very impressed. Hats off to Victor and Nick, council. I think it's been open, transparent, a lot of room for public comment. But I was thinking back to the election, and a lot of strong statements were made about the budget process. You know, it's not transparent. There's things going on in the back room. And so I was thinking this might be a good time, Matt, if you're willing to ask the participants in this room, do they have any concerns about what they're seeing? You'll get it out now rather than complain about it later. So, Matt, if you agree.
Sure. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Someone has an issue with how we do our budgeting?
Could come out a little earlier.
I'll speak to that.
All right.
Mark Rondell, across the street on Zoll Street here. I guess when I was thinking about the meeting tonight, what I would like to ask the council and say to the council, and I think this would be very helpful to you too, Victor. I, as a resident and taxpayer here, would like to see, I think, more clearly defined priorities of where we would make allocations in the budgets. I'd like for us to say, well, maybe the highest priority is creating reserve funds to replace city infrastructure. If the streets deteriorate and go to pieces, how important is it that we have reserve funds and we fund replacements for the boardwalk or the marina facility or any of the other infrastructure, the old city hall that the city is responsible for maintaining? Are those reserve funds highest priority? What is the last thing we're going to cut? What's the first thing we're going to cut? And I'd like to see us a framework that we can refer back to so that we can say, all right, here's where we should be looking at the first cuts. Here's where we should be looking at the last cuts. If our revenue situation becomes more constrained. And I think that would help everybody to sort of understand where things are. And I see this as also tying in with the general sort of a vision and a master plan for the whole community. That by our budgeting, we're saying, this is what we see most important for the community, the city to provide for the community. Is it lifeguard services for all the surrounding townships? Or is it services for the people who live in town, the residents? Are we a residential community? Do we want to be a residential community? Do we want people to live here? Or do we want to be a tourist place? I think we really need to define that, and I think if we define the budget priorities, it would help all of us to understand that, and there'd be less confusion when we get to meetings like this. I'm sick.
Well done.
Anything else?
Is there a specific, there's a wonderful detail in here, which I haven't absorbed, but is there a summary that shows where the cuts that we've heard about, you know, oh, they cut the leaves, they cut the, you know, lifeguards, a summary of the services that we've, the proposal.
Yes, there is.
Is that a document that's here? Or?
It's in this section here, in the.
Oh, in the summary
Perfect.
part?
Yeah, we have, there's,
overview.
there's an overview and there was also a PowerPoint presentation that we did at last council meeting.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It would not be reflected in the detailed numbers that you have
Okay,
until council decides how to proceed. Then the numbers get updated and the budget for 2022 would reflect those changes. But they
okay.
don't reflect it today.
So what's in here doesn't reflect the reduction of the, those services?
It does though.
It does.
It does.
Oh,
It does.
The proposed.
But these proposed cuts are nothing set in stone
No.
until the council
Right.
decides.
I understand.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my bad.
Okay.
It is there. Because it's proposed, right?
Okay.
I-
Anybody?
Just as a point, I don't feel like this is done in the dark by any means. It's just sometimes we're all so busy, we don't tune in to when these things are discussed and what are the best, when's the best time for us to chime in, or, you know, is it okay? I didn't realize till today that it was okay just to call Nick and say, hey, you know, what about this? What about that? And I guess that's been my issue. I never thought there was anything in the dark or in the background.
And to answer your question, somebody mentioned something, I think it might have been about doing this earlier.
Oh, the budget, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple reasons I would like to as well, just because then it would give primarily these guys and you guys more time to look through it. But certain things we wouldn't be able to, like estimating where we're gonna be at year end, because a lot of stuff gets paid out at the end of the year. But for next year, I think kind of ties in with what Mr. Rondell said, that, okay, maybe we can look at this in two different pieces here. Here's our operations, here's other things that we want to think about or do. And that's part of like the CIP process, and that could be done earlier in the year and then just plugged into a document like this time of year.
Might you explain CIP? to
Yeah,
the audience?
the CIP, which we've gone through multiple times, and I think Victor can pull it up. The budget that's placed here in front of you is more of an operational type budget with any CIP capital improvement projects that have been decided to inject it into here. For instance, this is where you'll see, as you question, some of the high dollar electric things that have to be done. Those then are scored and rated on needs and wants and necessity within the budget and then put in here accordingly based on the year. So those things are done throughout the course of the year. That's done usually in September and October. We work on that. And that becomes the first step in this. If that makes any sense. But yes, I understand what you're saying about a timing issue. It would be nice to be able to put this out in June so that people had 6 months to reflect on it, but
But the Petoskey issue there is October 1st.
did they put it on the website October 1st?
It's on there.
Because I looked in November and I didn't see it.
Was there today?
Well, and our charter specifically calls out the process, and so that might look at revising our charter if that's something the council wants to consider, because it specifically says
December 1st.
Yeah, so, I mean,
Is it practical to try and do it before that if you know, the budget and has to react to things that are voted on in November?
Some of the bigger things, maybe, yeah, you know, I mean, if we were to look at the CIP during the course of the year and earlier than this point where we're at now, then, okay, yeah, we need to have $2 million or else we're gonna be without power. That's something that I think people would need to know and want to know. And that way, when it jumps out at them in this budget, it's not a shock.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Janet Stewart. I live at 410 Pine Street. I hope, I can tell you, I'm not a registered voter here yet. I'm in the process of meeting that, but I'm just trying to figure out in a community like this, where I come to a couple meetings and we're talking about, do we want it to be a residential community? Do we want it to be a tourist community? And when I saw the proposal to eliminate the lifeguards at the public beach, which is so much a part of this community, I'm just kind of, and I know it's a big piece of what you might be able to save as far as what it costs, but it just seems to me like, I can't imagine Harbor Springs without a city beach. And one of the things that I think about, and I don't know the answer to this, I know the average age of the residents in the city, and it's quite old. I'm on the other side of that one, so I don't mind saying that. But what percentage of the population are school-age children? And I know, you know, people come in, tourists come in, they use the city beach, but it just seems to me that if I lived full-time and was raising a family in a city like this, the fact that my children could go to the public beach and feel safe is just an incredible benefit to living in a place like this. So I'm not sure how that piece of it got decided on, or maybe just a number of things thrown out, but I think it would be really, really awful if it came out of the budget.
I'm going to say I agree with you.
I agree too. I think just because we legally could not have lifeguards and, you know, have no culpability, you know, and we have from this saying, I don't think any of us are gonna feel any better if some man looks away in their kid grounds.
It really doesn't, I feel like it doesn't speak well to the city. Somebody coming into town and sees a beach and then it's swim at your own risk. It doesn't speak well of the character of the city, in my opinion. It says to me that the city really doesn't have any concern for who's visiting the town or who's living in its town. It speaks to a lack of concern.
Let's go close the beach.
Oh my gosh, let's just close Harbor Springs.
Karen Stroud Donnelly. I live at 644 Ann Street here in Harbor. Lived here for a long time. My kids did swim at the public beach all the time, and I always felt they were very safe. So obviously, there's a lot of support for maintaining the lifeguards at the beaches from all the various people that have spoken here. And we have to commend Marilyn for all the years she has put into the whole swim program in Harbor Springs with hammerheads and all the successes the swimmers have had as a result of having the recreational opportunities to swim at the beach. So my point, my comment here is you're getting all this input, and I'm curious what criteria you all have to use in order to decide what things are going to be kept and what things are going to be cut. And then second, I would be curious, and I kind of brought this up at the last meeting, where are there opportunities for funds from outside? I know we talked about assessments, millages, grant options, all of that. And I think for myself, it would be really great to be educated as to what those options could be. You know, where can we go outside? Because I think we're trying to cut $130,000 altogether on the budget, if I recall. So, you know, what can we do to get those funds elsewhere? And how soon can we? The other part of it is how soon can that happen? So I think the educational component would be really helpful, and especially communicating that to the residents of Harbor Springs so that they know. I think there's just more and more education outreach that we can do in regards to that. I think would be really important to allow us to get the money we need. You know, obviously, we're kind of stagnant right now, so there's got to be something else that can happen with the defeat of the Headley, the millage, changes there.
How soon before the revisit to the Headley could be on the ballot? Is it another year?
I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, okay.
Honestly, for some reason, it sticks to my mind that it's 24 months, 2 years, have to be the next general election in 2023. But I don't know that for sure.
I mean, to me, the lifeguard issue doesn't affect me personally as much. I'm more upset about the leaf pickup, but you know, I'll survive. And to me, that was worth, that kind of thing is worth paying for, and one of the reasons I like living in the city. And so for me, the millage seemed like, that the thing that was defeated in November it made sense to me that we should pass it. We want these things, and we're not talking great big budget dollars in here, but there's lots of gravy and lots of room to maneuver. So I mean, this is an impressive budget that's been put together, it seems to me. And to say, well, is there other, I understand there may be other resources, but it's like, it seems to me if there are things that we want in our city, we have to be willing to pay for them. And the way we pay is through our taxes. So.
I like the idea of maybe picking some things out of the general fund, right, that are in there right now, like parks, and putting that in a millage, and then that frees up money for lifeguards and leaf pickup. Boardwalk would be another example. And that maybe we ought to tackle like at least the next 2 years until we can look at overriding Headley again. Tackle our budget problems with maybe paying for capital stuff that we need through millages, and then that frees up funds for the general fund, general operating.
We are gonna have a meeting or discussion in the future on ways to increase our revenues.
Yeah, we had that a month ago, and I presented that overview of revenues and kind of first started with parking, and then we're gonna look more into other aspects. So.
Please don't put in parking meters.
The ladies first.
And sorry, I did ask Nick for an Excel spreadsheet so I can kind of look at this a little bit differently and slice and dice it. So I apologize, but just looking at this, I know it might be in a different bucket. But first I want to say on the CIP, before we start moving on some of the items on the CIP, since we're looking to take away the lifeguards, because I think the lifeguards do more than just saving lives with swimming, they're also taking care and watching what's happening with the general crowd. And so there's an additional safety element of what lifeguards do. It's just not about swimming. They're looking for safety, like, watching the roads, watching if other people are, working with the kids. So I think there's a bigger picture of what lifeguards do that we need to recognize. But with regards to the CIP, we have a splash pad in there, we have an amphitheater in there. I think we need to maybe move those out before we can actually, we need to get the budget corrected where we are before we start looking at these long-term CIP plans of the,
We're required by the state to look at these plans.
But splash pad, we're looking right now, talking about getting rid of the raft.
But that's not part of this budget, though.
I understand, but it's still out there, but we're talking about taking that away.
Splash pad in the CIP that
Yeah.
I saw.
It's $60,000 I saw a splash pad in there. But anyway,
Whatever.
so I'm looking at, and I'm not looking at one area, but just at the city management department. We go from just salaries from 2020, 82,600 to 2021 to 110,000, which is 33% increase. And I don't know if that is a contractual, but then for 2022, we dropped down to 100,000. So I would think the salaries would be constant going across, but we dropped down for 2022 for budget. And then when I look at Social Security and that under the department, Social Security is 7.65%, but I'm seeing a 22%. But then if I look at other departments, it changes. And then for instance, retirement, I see for that department, looking at 17%, but then other departments for their pension is 9%. Is there a variable from different people's salary? Is that because of maybe their overall salary is lower compared to a higher paying individual with that pension contribution might be?
Are we talking simply the city manager section?
Yeah, I just looked at one. I'm just looking at one, when I looked at other, but that's why I kind of asked to see if I can look at this and look at the changes. And I understand this is budget. I understand that, based on time, for instance, Rachel is spending time here and then she might be spending time here and you break that out. To me, it's a little bit confusing to make sure that we are kind of looking that rolls up to the right salary for that individual. It was a little bit confusing for me to look at it. And given that information, there is what's called a vitality, a vitality report that the state offers that if you do participate where you're showing your budget and the citizens can see where we are, and it's more of just reporting, they give you additional funds to the city by doing these additional workups for budgets. That is available for us to have. It's some extra funds that can be available to us by just providing this overt review of the budget up front quarterly. And I didn't know if this quarter ended in September and you were just taking Q4 and estimating it. So that's sort of some of the things I just didn't understand. But to me, I understand we are kind of putting placeholders on the budget. But I didn't understand going from 82,000 to 110,000, then down to 100,000 for 2022 for the salaries.
Okay, I can touch on that a little bit. City manager, there's only 2 or 3 sections in this whole document that you would be able to ascertain one person's wage.
Yeah.
The rest of them, all of our DPW, they're spread across all of these funds. They could be working on a street or mowing a park.
Right.
It just depends. So the pension side of that would follow that, but not all of the employees have a pension. We have a lot of seasonal wages, part-time wages that come and pick up garbage, blah, blah, blah. But when it gets down to, like specifically, you said the city manager, I think if you look in 2020, the 82,662, and you have to look at then a portion of pay time off and sick leave to get what would be the city manager's actual wage.
That's holiday leave.
So that would roll it.
And
back.
holiday leave, that would roll it up. There's other factors in 2020 because we also had an assistant at that time. So there was some payout for PTO and stuff
So we
like
didn't
that.
take it out in consideration. So we didn't pull that out for 20.
Okay, so then the next question would be, you look at 2021, the budgeted 99, and in reality, that PTO didn't have a number figured into it.
Okay.
That's an error I see on my part. So if Victor, city manager, has, I don't know, whatever his wage is, and he takes 2 weeks off, a portion of that then will go down into time off, or if there's a holiday pay.
Okay, and so, but go to the Social Security, because I see 22% for the change in 2021, but employee Social Security should be 7.65.
Correct, you're right.
And Rachel, I know she's park and recreation, but we took the money from being the assistant over to park and recreation, but now she's doing grants. Are we moving that? How are we categorizing?
She's doing a grant for Parks and Recreation.
But-
That's part of her duties, as part of the Parks and Rec.
And I understand that. My question is, how do we keep on moving these things around to the different departments? Because it's based on time, And for me, I didn't have the time to go through Excel to really look at this, and that's just one thing that I saw for like social security. It would be nice to roll up just the salary so you can see the bigger picture across the board. Because right now I have to go and add the different things up around this and try to get my head around it because, you know, you have equipment rental underneath the city manager department. So it's just, I was just trying to get my head around this, you know.
Well, yes, I can honestly understand where you're coming from with this because I go through all of the wages and all the salaries for every employee here and try to figure out through a crystal ball of what they're going to be doing the next year. Not easy, so.
Yeah.
However, and I don't mean to make that sound like something that you're not asking the right questions. What I would like to maybe get you to understand is when you go through all of these pages, these are done by trend.
Right.
So the guys will be doing their leaf pickup or whatever it may be. And I can't say, I don't know how long that's going to take because I don't know the weather, blah, blah, blah. So I look at what it's cost traditionally for the last 5 years and say, okay, here's where we're at.
But a salary should be consistent, but we dropped down in 2022. And social security should be consistent.
You're right, Social Security, there's a cell in there that's obviously incorrect. And that's where we're at. I mean,
And
I can change that.
Yeah, and I just didn't have, you know, that's all I could get my head around for right now.
But as far as the salary for 2022, the 100,000 plus the 10,000 and the 5,000 would be his annual salary. What he takes off for time, I don't know what he does. You know, I mean, if he stays here and works every day and doesn't take a day off, that 10,000 would be a moot point. I'd have to adjust that to
So it's not
zero.
a salary, it's based on his time that he's still checking. It's not a salary.
This is a salary.
Yeah, but, okay. So, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I guess my question based on this is, but assuming, I understand that breaking it down, the detail, the difficulty of breaking it down, but you're comfortable that the total salaries that are reflected in this are the total salaries overall that paid and what you expect to pay in the next year.
Correct. From what I can tell with what we've got for
Right, but
wages,
I
I
mean-
don't know what people's wages are going to be.
Right, oh, I understand that, but based on what they are right now.
Right, so we have 2 union contracts and that specifies right in there that the wage increase for the 99.9% of the employees will be whatever it is, 2.5%. I don't know, I don't have that document in front of me. But in order to do that, then I would have to look at each one of these line items way back here in, you know, whatever this fund is, the major street fund, and say, okay, in theory, you would think that would be a 2.5% increase. But if we don't have anything that needs to be cleaned up or done on that particular section, it could be zero.
Sure.
And my one last thing is that we're spending $10,000 a year for Housing North or whatever to find out additional housing. But we are talking about a 4-year plan to raising $10 million for electrical. We're at 80% for peak seasons. Do we really need to be looking at increasing housing when we need to be managing our electrical and just kind of hold back until we can manage our power grid as it is, instead of trying to increase housing in this town? That was my only other aha on this.
One clarification, council, there's no splash pad in the CIP. So.
There was years ago.
Okay, I just saw it just a couple of weeks ago, so.
Couple of years ago. So.
Rick,
Rick Tarczynski, city resident, 465 State Street. If the cutbacks go and the brush pickup and the leaf pickup are trashed as it is in the budget, is that going to shut down the hill where we can recycle our leaves, or will that continue?
That'll still be open.
I don't know that we've had this conversation, but I would make the judgment right now that if council chooses to take away the pickup, that will still be available for people to put their
Okay.
stuff up there.
Because otherwise we need to think about the environment. Everybody's got to run all their leaves all the way to the transfer station. That's not a good thing. The other thing I noticed about the budget and the brush pickup and the leaf pickup, a large part of that budget is equipment rental. And every year, $15,000. Is there not equipment that could be purchased and cut that back? It seems like by now you could have paid off equipment every year, paying that amount of money. Because is that for like what the payloader to do the composting, or is that the shredder?
City owns all the equipment and the departments pay a state mandated rate.
Okay, so it's not
It's
being
just a way
rented
for us
outside.
to justify the,
It's an internal thing.
yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, it's not actual. That is confusing. Thanks.
Two things, real quick, Nick, I go back to what Meg was saying real quick on the social security. Does that cell populate automatically, or do you put in a number for that?
Some of them do, some of them I put in manually. That to me, and that's wrong.
All right, just, okay, some of the numbers throughout the budget kind of do that where, like she said, 7.65%, it's not, it's 10 to 12. I'm just wondering how many little places like that might be $1,500 here, $2,000 here, and then the budget decisions are made off of this, and there could be 30 or 40,000 of calculation assumptions that we might be able to adjust.
Might change.
Yeah, for
Correct.
instance, the 12,000 from the three items you just said for city manager, social security, when you add those up and do social security rate, it's 8,800, 12,000. So there's $3,200 right there, and we go 31 pages of that, it may be a lot up.
Yeah.
So, and then the other real quick thing, right on the summary of the budget. Victor, you guys said you did this conservatively at the last meeting. So revenues may be a little low, expenses might be a little high, to be conservative. You're showing a beginning fund balance of 9.5 and an ending fund balance of 9.9. So that's $400,000 to the plus side on a conservative budget. So maybe, let's just assume maybe there's 100,000 of fluff in there, so we're 500,000 of plus side. Is it possible one or two of these things could be brought back and maybe bring that fluff down a little?
And a total,
Yeah.
the increase from 9.5 to 9.9 at $400,100 is accumulation of all of the funds, governmental, enterprise, and internal service. So if you look across, you'll see that with these numbers, it's projecting that we are going to have an increase in a fund balance of, what is that? $72,000 and change in the general fund, which is roughly almost exactly what our bond payment is.
Oh,
That bond payment does not affect fund balance, it affects the balance sheet by reducing the bond debt. So then when you go down the pipe there, major street, local street, we're trying to budget to the point where we're either at zero or a slight increase. And then when you get some of the larger increases that would do that, you get into the enterprise funds. For instance, electric. Electric, 2.9 we started out with, you got through all the expenditures, blah, 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 in the middle there, and you get to the 3 million. That's a substantial increase, and that is part of our proposed rate structure increase that we've had the meeting here last week. Whether that comes to fruition, I don't know. That's a topic when we set rates in January, if that's even going to be an issue. So increasing these fund balances is really what we're supposed to be doing, not by leaps and bounds where we're hoarding money. Back to what I think Mr. Rondell had said, that we also have to have a little cushion for when things like this come up. But yeah, there's always things here and there that we can tweak. And as the year goes through in this budget process, I look at this on a monthly basis somehow or some fashion or another. These things then when we come to December of next year at this time, okay, look, I put in the wrong figure for Social Security for the city manager. Boom, I get that changed.
Okay.
Am I perfect? No.
Well, and I'm sure there's some that are probably under where they're gonna end up too.
Right, but I poured through this for 6 weeks, pretty much every day, nonstop, so this right here is, we could squeeze $1,500 probably, we could squeeze $3,000 here and there. I think that we're boiling back to the whole Headley thing, and my whole point to the council and anybody that was willing to listen to me, which so far has been nobody, with the exception of Kathy. The concern I'm having is not what I would say. It's a more of a current, we're just starting to see the beginning of it. When our property tax values decrease, hopefully they don't, and this is a non-issue. When our property tax values decrease, these revenues, as Victor put in one of our things, we don't necessarily have an expenditure problem. I don't think there's anybody in this room or at this table that want to see lifeguards, leaf pickup, brush, any of that go away. Because we don't. I'd like to add services, if anything. Money's got to come from somewhere. So with this Headley override, my whole push on this from day one has been, I want the city, whether I'm here, dead, or wherever I may be, I want the city to be in a position where these people at this table can make a decision to say, we need to raise the millage at the truth and taxation hearing in July or June or whenever that is. We need to raise it 0.2 of a mil to cover what we're doing. Right now, that millage will drop again this up and coming year. Then we're just perpetuating the problem. So, and that also brings in the special millages, which I'm not opposed to. You know, okay, here's 1 mil for arts, recs, whatever we're doing, public safety, I don't know. And that would pull expenditures out of the general fund and take the burden off for the time being. If the trend continues from our 5.86 mils down to 5.5 to 5.2 to 4.8, it's just going to snowball. And that was the whole premise of the Headley Amendment override. So maybe I went over and above with my liturgy for your question, but there's a lot more to the story than what we're doing here. I mean, it's a big picture.
The other point that I think Todd was just starting to make is that council has the ability to adjust the budget and expenditures and priorities throughout the year, right? I mean, you know, if it's March and we get another look at the budget, things look better than we thought. Maybe there's still time to gin up a lifeguard crew. Maybe there's that.
You do bring a very good point, and this is something that I was going to bring up, and I hadn't thought of it until tonight. What the city has historically done is the administration is looking at this stuff on a daily basis as we're paying bills, doing everything. But what I would like to see happen for one of that specific purpose and for transparency, let's look at this in March and say, okay, here's where I thought we were going to be. We're quarter way through the year. I wasn't even close. Let's amend this. And you're right. Maybe we can say, you know what? Something didn't transpire the way we thought it would. You know, maybe we can do this.
Yeah, maybe July comes and we say, you know what, we could do the brush pickup. We can only do it a couple times or something. So,
Right. But I would recommend as this whole session to do this on a quarterly basis for years to come. You know, here's an update, guys. We'll have a meeting planned. It'll be part of every quarter's meeting. Here's a budget update. Here's where we're at. I think that would be a good thing for everybody involved, myself included.
I just ask one other question. Are there the state have legal requirements as to how much the fund balances have to be, or?
No, I've never really found anything that said you need to have 28.6% of whatever.
Okay.
What's always been recommended by our auditors and auditing when I did it was anywhere from 6 to 12 months of fund balance. If operations, all revenue stopped and you still had expenditure to pay, it's the heavier side because, you know, the first project that we did when I started working here was $1 million FEMA project that nobody even had seen on the radar. But there is no set in stone thing. If you look at some of the fund balances in these papers, you'll see the electric fund, the motor pool fund, and some of the few other ones might have even more than the 9 to 12 months. And there's a reason for that, especially the motor pool fund, because we have a snowplow that's on the docket to be replaced or a loader, you know, and these are $300,000 piece of equipment. So we try to plan ahead, not buy as much equipment in these years, knowing that we have to buy a bucket truck for the electric department.
Did have a comment on Zoom, so I'll get that one out. Hold on. From Miranda Miller, on a 90-degree day when the beach is packed with loads of children and families and no lifeguard on duty, and saying we resolve ourselves to any liability is egregious and not how Harbor Springs has ever felt about protecting our children. A crowded beach with no watchdog is fodder for undesirable predators. With the boardwalk being very likely unnecessarily closed, again, places our children at risk. The boardwalk provides protection for the school children from traffic on 119. Now they have to cross 119. Why is it fruitless to have the boardwalk assessed by a structural engineer to ascertain if the boardwalk is safe and could still be used by the community until construction would begin?
Good question. My name is Carol Winter. I live at 141 Snyder Street. And my question, it's actually a comment made 2 years about the Headley override. And I think it would be really beneficial because I'm a numbers person, I have a finance degree. But until you really dive into the Headley amendment, you don't really understand the ramifications. So I think if I had questions on it, and I have a finance background and an interest in it, then I think a lot of people don't understand it. And even simple things like looking at what your taxable value is and your assessed value, if people could have that explained to them, and starting in 2008, what happened to the real estate values, et cetera.
Sure, no, I absolutely agree 100% because when I sit down and think it through, I really have to sit here and process how it works.
Yeah. So I think if people really saw a chart that said, oh my gosh, I own this house in 2007 and I paid this tax rate. And I own it now in 2021 and I pay less now than I did in 2017 or 2007. I think a lot more people understand that the Headley Amendment has put incredible constraints on municipalities. So I think if we can figure out a way to educate people and keep it at a level where it's really basic to show them the effect of it, then maybe we can get more support for it going forward. Because to your point, I don't know where else you get the revenue.
The general fund's a little strapped, and to answer your question in a roundabout way about the educational process, we had dozens of meetings. We had meetings here, we had meetings at Marina Park, we met for lunch, Victor and I, and nobody showed up. We had meetings here 3 or 4 nights during the whole period. We put stuff on the website, we had all sorts of different meetings. Nobody showed up.
Carol and I have talked a lot about this, and I'm also a finance major, and I did not understand a lot about Headley.
And I'm sure there's nuances that we don't fully understand.
And we looked at it again tonight, but even trying to understand what prompts the forced reduction in the millage rate. I mean, I think we look at a lot of these great big new homes that are being built and thinking, and I have said this before, wow, there's a lot more tax revenue for the city when this house comes up and someone buys it, but that's not true. So I think somehow, if we can't vote again for 2 years, it's gonna be really difficult, but when we do, and I know it is hard, like you said, you have tried as a council to educate the community, and I don't know the answer, short of knocking on doors, but to have some chart that says, okay, assume we have 100 houses in town, and 90 of those, their taxable value doesn't move one bit. Now we're gonna build 10 great big multi-million-dollar houses. We're all gonna think we have this increase in revenue, but somehow show there that you can't increase that tax revenue above the inflation rate. Is that, I think that's somewhat.
In a nutshell, it was designed to not force an inflationary increase on property taxes more than the inflationary rate
Right, so in
for an
essence,
individual homeowner. So it would, instead of regulating somehow the increase in property tax values, this whole proposal and then proposal, what is it, amendment A, it all works together to reduce the millage rate so that these property tax values are not going
right, so
like this.
So in essence, for those 90 of us whose taxable value didn't change at all, theoretically, we could experience a tax decrease because our millage rate is down. But I think if you put it that way to people, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna have a huge increase in taxes, and I think people don't understand that. And I understand why, because I think it's very complicated.
It is very complicated, and there's one other factor that plays into this is that, say this thing had passed and whatever, okay, we're having this conversation now, the Headley override had passed. Here's the budget, $1.6 million, whatever, I don't even know what it is, 3 million. What are our property tax values right now? And what millage rate would it take for me to meet those $3 million in expenditures?
Yeah.
That is where the truth of taxation hearing comes in. Then I can't just say, well, let's levy 10 and just start stockpiling money. We have to work within what we know we're going to be spending and not levy more than that.
But that's not what the message is out there. And that's, I think both Janet and I are not, we recognize that and I've attended several meetings and people don't show up. Even today, there should be a lot more people here. There are more people at basketball games.
Well, I would honestly, I would.
I think that if we can't put it back on the ballot for 2 years, then we've got to engage everyone who's interested in this in getting the message out as to what the ramifications are if we don't override it next time.
Yeah,
And
again, nobody wants
nothing
to
else,
speak
we all have
taxes. Nobody wants to speak taxes ever.
Yeah.
But again, this is not something that there's an agenda that any of us are trying to say, we wanted this so we can do this, this, and this, and this. This is for the people that might come after us, the people that aren't here. What's gonna happen 5 years from now, if and when, hopefully it doesn't, property taxes values go down, this number of 1 point, whatever it is in revenues, and the general fund will be cut by almost dollar for dollar, 20%, 25, 25, 10. That's the whole premise behind the Headley. Kind of a little different process than what we're working at here, but they obviously do go hand in hand.
So Nick, I was here in 78 or whenever Headley first came in. I was here in 94 when Proposal A came in. I've asked all kinds of people. I understand, I think, the concept that the millage rates are to go down so that we cap the total amount of revenue to the existing revenue plus rate of inflation or whatever. I think I understand that. What I don't understand, and Victor, you and I talked about this a couple meetings ago, is why is there also, in addition to this, the limitation that you cannot ever raise the millage rate? Even to get back to that level of revenue that I just can't
That's one of the.
understand
That was one of the,
Legislation was enacted that does this.
correct, that was what I call an unintended consequence of this.
But
whole
it doesn't take a
legislation.
genius to figure it out. I'm not a finance person these days. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you want to limit the total taxation, that's fine. But then don't put in an additional caveat that you can never jack the millage rates. That's nuts. I don't get it. And is that right? I mean,
I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's
no,
where
no, but
we're
is
at.
it true that we absolutely cannot raise ever
So
millage rates?
proposal A says, not that, so proposal A, what it says is that once we, let's say Headley takes us down to 5.2, right? That's what's limiting us from putting it back up. Proposal A.
What's limiting us?
Proposal A.
So proposal A came in and said, never in all history are municipalities ever going to be allowed to raise millage rates.
No, from the cap, from our cap. So right now, we're capped, our authorized max is 5.7.
Yeah.
So if, let's say our authorized max was 15 and our millage rate right now was 5.7, we still could raise it to 7 or 8. We couldn't raise it past whatever Headley took it down in 10 years from now. Let's say it takes us down, if we're at 15, it took us down to 12, we could not raise it past that 12 without going back to the voters. That's what proposal A says, even if the proper values decrease.
And that's why you see the schools have this ballot initiative every 2 to 4 years. They do it on a cycle. So that they're bringing theirs back up so that they don't have to, I don't think ours has ever been addressed since the
78.
village was set in charter. And it's fine because it hasn't been an issue. Now things are getting more expensive, blah, blah, blah. People want different things, but we're still down here at 5.8.
So the schools have a process whereby they can reset their.
The Headley override. I mean, just what we just went through, it might be termed a little differently in theirs.
That's what.
Right, because there's an option to override the Headley, but there's no option to override proposal A. Proposal A is something that Michigan Municipal League is working on lobbying.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah. State to overhaul that.
Obviously, at the time that it was done, it was thought to be a good plan for the citizens and to control taxes. So maybe it needs revisiting, but at the time, it sounded like it was pretty good. But to answer y'all's question too, your statement, a large part of the reason why the Headley was objected to so strongly was because it was a 20-year limit on it. That meant it wouldn't be revisited for 20 years,
Excuse me,
right?
you need to address the council,
Oh, I'm
not
sorry.
other people in the
Okay.
audience. Thank you.
I apologize.
Yes.
Once again, may I say that part of the concern about the Headley in the meetings that we've sat here and discussed came to the tenure, the length of the proposal, as well as the constraints of the proposal. That was one of the things. So I just wanted to put that on the record tonight in the discussion, that the length of the time was also one of the items that had the citizens largely concerned. 20 years was a long time.
I know we're on a little different topic than our Headley. We've beat this to death for the last 2 years. But I do want to address that. The 20 years was a safety gap for the taxpayers. That for 20 years, the city will not increase this more than $500,000. When that cap is removed, and that was voted back to 15 mils, that's what it is. It's indefinite until this whole Headley process starts to ratchet it down over the next 50 years. So during the budget time, they could say, all right, we only need 0.2 mils. The 20 years really doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. That was a safety gap that the city put in there to say, you know what? The budgeting process has checks and balances about not raising just the sky's the limit. There's already those checks and balances in there with the truth and taxation hearing. The $500,000 was just an additional safety thing put by council on the ballot to say, not only do we have these safety things in place already, but we're going to put an additional one saying, no matter what happens, we are not going above $500,000, regardless of whether we might be 0.7 or 0.8. We're putting an additional limit on it. So the 20 years from now, that 15 mills would not just say, okay, we're going back to where we were the day we voted it. That's not how it works, but it's hard to explain that. So anyway, that's my spiel.
That's a little different explanation than what was a few meetings back, so thank you for
But,
making that
but that was
clarification.
not, that was the explanation that I have been given to people that have asked me since this has all started. And so far, that's the first time anybody's asked me.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll check on Zoom. Is there anyone on Zoom that wants to make additional comments? All right, so if there's no other public comment, then a motion to close the hearing and
I
go
would
into
make a
council
motion to
discussion.
close the public hearing.
Second.
Second. Okay, John Cups.
Yeah.
Al Dyke.
Yes.
John Leo.
Yes.
Matt McGura.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay.
So next, I envision this is where council discusses and council tells us what you want to see in the budget that will take, Nick and I will take. We'll edit whatever you want us to edit and bring it back to next Monday's council meeting for final approval.
Well, we want to address the fun ones, get that out of the way. Lifeguards and leaf pickup.
Sure.
Sure. Let's go.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of strong sentiment about the lifeguards. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And I would think that that's one that we do have to plan a bit ahead about, because you have to hire young people to do that. This is just my thoughts. I'm not saying what we should do. Leaf and brush, from the last meeting, I hate to get rid of that. That's a local residence thing that also seems to be important to folks.
When we implemented that, which was
A
a
while
long,
ago.
long time
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah,
I think that there's a state law that doesn't allow you to burn leaves anymore. And and that's why the council reacted to that. In the city, maybe it was a city law or something where it's just, where we're concentrated, but there was I recall that you couldn't burn leaves anymore. So we started the pickup, and that grew to the composting thing. But as I recall, that was mandate, we had to do that. Or else people would have to haul the stuff out of town and throw it in the woods.
well, there's a lot of people that don't have any way to haul it.
I agree.
I mean, that's something that really is a concern for me, is to get rid of that. I think a lot of people a fair number of people use that leaf and brush pickup. And we did used to charge, didn't we used to charge when people hired a service to rake their leaves? They either had to pick up their own leaves. We didn't used to pick up their leaves. I am 99%.
They're supposed to pick up their own.
They're supposed to pick up their own leaves, but I don't think that's happening anymore. I think the city's picking them all up.
Some do. Some walk around with the same equipment that the city does. Others don't.
Okay, so there's an element of why are we picking up leaves we're not supposed to be picking up? That's,
Part of it.
so. But I don't think we can stall the lifeguard decision till March or April. I think if we're gonna find lifeguards, we have to do that before then, I would imagine.
Lynn, when do you usually advertise and hire lifeguards? Is it like March, April?
It is March or April, and we do normally just fine hiring in March and April.
Okay.
'Cause we get typically all the college kids, so they're not even running until March or April. They don't start servicing until then anyways.
Okay,
Thanks, Lynn.
but I don't wanna just kick the can down the road either.
Right.
I feel like if we're just put it all off till March to decide that. It's a tough one, the electors said we don't wanna up we don't want to uncap the Headley and collect more money, but we don't want to get rid of any services. So I don't have a magic answer.
You can't, but you can't have both.
I don't have a
That's
magic
exactly
answer.
what Nick was explaining, you can't have both.
Is there any way that we can, what money we collect from the townships and surrounding folks for the parks, the beach, those things? Is that a set amount, or could that help us out in terms of paying for lifeguards?
So we already taken money for them for the lifeguards, and actually by reducing, you probably see in our revenue is that you'll see a decrease in our, I guess, fees and revenue from the township. So it's under other recreation fees, I believe, from $37,000 in 2021 to $25,000 in 2022.
Who sets those fees?
Well, basically, Nick sends out a letter of, this is how much you guys.
It's not a, not something I just pull out of the air. There's a percentage of Little Traverse, West Traverse, and the city. There's a percentage just saying, okay, and maybe these need to be
I was just
revisited.
gonna say, are they,
How many, what's the percentage of, let's just say the beach and kids, how many local city residents use that beach to opposed to
compared
Little
to?
Traverse or West
Yeah.
Traverse? How anybody would actually be able to define that, I have no idea.
Mhm.
We
But
took
it's-
surveys.
Yeah, and
We surveyed the users of the beach. And we did it over a period of time. And then those are the percentages that the communities agreed to.
When was that last time?
But-
Oh, that was a long time ago. That's when we
We're,
implemented.
we're finding that there are a lot of rates that have been set a long time ago.
So I would think that's an area we could look at. I think we have a lot, our school age kids in town have dropped. The number of kids that live in town and go to school have dropped, and the ones outside have increased.
And I think we could sell that to our neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a legitimate ask as one way of recouping that rather than getting rid of the lifeguards.
I
Maybe
agree.
we need to look at funding it a little bit differently
Agree with that.
for my two students. And lifeguards.
which goes right back to it's more of a revenue problem than an expense problem.
Mhm.
But yes, I think you're right. If we reached out, I'd probably somebody from the council, maybe reached out to some of our surrounding township supervisors and had this conversation again. So you reinstate lifeguards, hopefully collect a little more revenue from the outlying townships.
They're heavy users of our parks. I mean, I think that's a given. All you have to do is go down there and, you know, they're heavy users of our public facilities. So I think that's something. we
That
should-
survey doesn't help us this year.
No,
It could if we talked to, no, the survey probably would not. We wouldn't really
So we
have an
wouldn't have any
accurate
data
survey.
to carry to
Correct.
the neighbors to substantiate our requests. So
well, but everything costs more now than it did when you did the survey, right? We have to pay our lifeguards more. So, I mean, I think an ask to increase a little bit is probably justified. But we'd have to talk to the folks who get to decide that.
So on the revenue problem topic, we've talked about millages. I mean, the voters clearly said, we don't want to override Headley. And it's really gratifying to hear more and more people who have delved into it, who will now understand not everything, 'cause like you said, I'm not sure we understand all the nuances, but they're beginning to understand the implications of Headley and the limitations and the problem we're headed for, because from 2021 to 2022, the millage is going down again. So it's going to accelerate. What is the process that we would go through to put to the voters a millage for parks and rec, or for brush, or for, you know, any of the expenses that we're talking about? Because we can't not increase revenue and keep the service.
So it's the same process as we would have done for the Headley override, basically. And we could choose a special election date if you wanted to, but it would be several months.
I would recommend that putting it on the November ballot, if that's something that was a discussion for
So
time.
again, no relief this year.
The only relief I could see is not through a special millage, but as discussed at the last meeting, a special assessment for something like leaf and brush. But the difficulty there is we'd really have to look at all the properties that actually could use it. I mean, you can't just take all the houses and residences in the city because some of them don't have yards in the downtown district.
Right.
But it could be done, theoretically, it could be done.
Which would also go to a vote.
No, special assessments don't need to go to vote. That just needs to have a public hearing. And that goes to council. Special millages need to go to vote. You remember from the revenue presentation, special assessments are allowed to be done as long as they theoretically bring some sort of tax value increase. So the idea is that, but at the same time, it could be viewed as from the public as you're taking this away from us just to give us a special assessment. Or it can be viewed from the other end of things as like, we have to get rid of something and we have to pay for that. Just like we're doing with, hopefully with paid parking, if that does go through, the idea is that we can shift some of that cost from our police parking lots to that paid, from that paid parking. The money we get from the paid parking can pay for things in our budget to free up $100,000 to $200,000 or more for all these other things. But that system would take itself probably a year to pay itself back. I mean, we'll have that discussion next year, but it's not a solution for this year.
Well, there are no immediate
solutions. Exactly. So, and I think another thing to mention is I think, and I speak for Nick too, like any cuts that we propose, it's our best guess of trying to get this down to a balanced budget, but it's also not our intentions to say this is a permanent cut. It's until we can find the solution, the revenue solution for this. But if these are not the things that council wants to cut, then we have to look at something else or have a deficit. And that's
semantics, but I don't think any of us want to cut this. What we have to do is be fiscally responsible and realize that with the income we have, we can't continue with the expense rate we have. None of us want to cut it.
We do find ourselves in a deficit, that's less money we can spend on the boardwalk. That's just, or any other project, right?
Or any other service.
Well, another thing that I looked at was fund balances. And of course, I'm a waterfront advocate. So I argue that one, that we need that reserve for self-insurance. But the recommendation in the PowerPoint was that the equipment fund should be 450 to 500. And we've got 900 in there. And wow.
Right, that's, and we had this discussion, Lucas and I, after last time the meeting, he wasn't here. I believe if you look in the CIP, and I touched on it a little bit, we've got several plow trucks and front end loaders that are needing to be replaced. And he's been planning this for a few years now. So, but yes, there is. And then the other thing about that though is that money, I mean, we could make it a transfer to the general fund. It's not recommended. That is a specific fund for equipment rent. And those rates are set by the state. It's really.
But why can't we refund it back to those that contributed? Feed those funds.
I'd have to look and see if that's even legal.
Because it seems like we overcharged them.
We charge the state rates. We just haven't been buying equipment for the last 3 to 5 years compared to what we normally would, because Lucas has been planning on 3 or 4 big ticket items. Well, truck. But yes, it's certainly something we.
That one just jumped out at me.
But it's always tempting when you have strong reserves to dip into them to cover a short-term problem. To me, that would be tantamount to kicking it down the road again. We're here today with these issues because this wasn't dealt with in the past. And if that's a reserve, which it would have been great to have had for the boardwalk and for the other capital assets that need to be maintained. We're not addressing the problem of revenue. We're just moving things around again. And that worries me.
I think that it's been claimed that this is a short-term problem.
We'll claim it was,
That you guys have said all night that, until we figure out how to get more revenue, we have to cut these funds or these programs.
But no one knows what the time frame to get that additional revenue is.
Yeah, I mean, passing a millage could be a 5-year proposition.
We have the power if we have the will.
It could get voted down again. Yeah.
Well, I think I'll just specifically talking about the equipment fund, and that probably would have been better for me to explain in the presentation. That fund is a little different than all of other funds because it doesn't have a general operating kind of there's no service, like the waterfront fund, there's staff, there's things you have to do every year. Equipment fund is specifically there just to fund equipment. Really, that's what it's there for. So, I mean, in my presentation, I don't think I probably made that clear enough that I probably should look at it a little bit different for the equipment fund compared to the other funds. Because that fund, you're supposed to save up to buy these equipments and these big pieces of equipment in the future. So the risk we run too is if we're legally allowed to, to transfer some of that money in the general fund is, all right, what happens then when a snowplow breaks down and we have to spend $250,000 and we don't have it in the equipment fund, we got to go to general fund. That could be 2 years, that could be 1 year, it could be 3 years, we don't know. So we run that risk if we don't have a high equipment fund balance. So
The recommended fund is $500,000 and we've got 900.
that was based, I was sorry, that's what I probably.
It's in the budget that you presented to us.
That was in the PowerPoint presentation I presented as a theoretical, what our reserve policy balance to be and what ideal budgets would be. And I just said right now, I think I probably should have phrased equipment fund a little differently than the rest of them because the equipment fund doesn't have operating expenses like all the other funds. What I was thinking about was what an ideal fund to cover a year's worth of operations, right? So if we're spending $500,000 a year, we would need $500,000 in a reserve fund to cover that fund. But since equipment fund doesn't work that way, some years it might be 250, some years it might be 700, depending on what we're buying. It's a little different than the other funds. That's coming across clear or not? Nick, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit different.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I understand that fully. I've just made my point. And if the council wants to go along with it, go.
I think a different
Don't.
fund, like you said, I know you don't want to talk about the waterfront fund is another example of that, right? Because waterfront fund, we have set expenses of probably $500,000 or so, $600,000 a year. But we were trying to save up money there for either, harbor master building or in case docks go. So you need that.
But the Harbor Commission, since we bought and built the new dock and realized that we can't insure that.
Yeah.
Made a commitment to build a self-insurance fund.
Yep.
And it took us years to build it.
Mhm.
And we still believe that money is necessary to be there in case we get that big east wind during the thaw, which we're going to lose the dock.
Right, and yeah, I agree.
So that's, in my mind, although you got, 750 in there, 5 of that is self-insurance. I don't think you can play with that.
No, and this is where I agree with you. So what I was trying to say is the waterfront fund, when I said the ideal would be $500,000, just like with the equipment fund, it's because if, let's say we didn't have any revenue coming in for a year, we would need to have $500,000 just to ensure this basic operations, let alone we would need extra money to replace a dock or to replace a building. So when I was giving that example of what is our ideal fund balance is to cover basic operations, not to cover capital improvements. I would call a dock thing a capital improvement, even though it's a necessary capital improvement, it's still a capital improvement. So I just want to make clear that that ideal fund balance was to cover operating costs and not to cover capital expenditures. That capital expenditure would be, purchasing a plow truck, a docks, a substation. Those are the capital expenditures I'm thinking about.
So what about the historical fund, which also has a lot of extra money in it, right?
Yeah.
15,000 is the recommended, and uses are 185,000.
Yeah. And that's coming back to the general fund at some point.
The
The council, there's a discussion we're gonna have with the Historical Society, because the city owns the building.
Right.
If this Historical Society takes over and runs that, there's gonna be, I don't know, some contracts or something like to that effect, then that money in that historical fund would either be in part, parcel, or total left there to maintain the building, or if the Historical Society completely takes over all expenses, that money then would come back to the general fund, yes. Because the general fund supported that fund for 25 years. But that's something that we don't know the answer to yet.
We typically put about $35,000 a year into that historical fund until our Joyce Shaganambi, our curator, they're retired. And
So we're talking about Blackbird Museum building.
Yes,
Period.
Right.
just Blackbird
I
Museum.
got the right building, okay.
And by state, by our, the deed for that building, that has to be maintained as a museum. So we can't just close it down, or else it goes back to the state. someone has to maintain it. So that's where we decided whether we do it internally, but just talking with our historical society, they're
Yeah, they're
better,
gonna do it.
yeah, probably be better suited to manage this museum.
Yeah. Somebody else's turn.
You can ask the mayor if he wants to open it back up to public comment.
Right,
We're gonna talk.
for a quick clarification on what Victor just said.
Sure.
This, when you talk about historical site, you're talking about the black, not about the
Not
No, we're-
the
no, we-
museum, not the city hall, the old city hall.
So Old City Hall is operated by the Historical Society. We lease it to them. But the specific fund is just the Blackbird Museum. That's the historical fund that we have.
Okay, that's the
Just the
150,000,
The 185,000.
185,000.
That's the money that's been put in it for 25 years. It's saved up over time in case we need to do major repairs there. And for
Okay,
example, some,
And that came to us from the state
no,
and,
that came from the general fund.
Came from the
no,
general.
no, but.
Oh, the museum, it was, yes, it was
Museum.
deeded to us. Yep.
Was deeded to us by the state,
I think it was Michigan Indian Trust. There was some kind of
okay?
program.
And if we decide not to operate it as a museum, it would go back to that.
There's potential. The deed language says it reverts back to the original owner, but the original owner doesn't exist, I think. And I forget the official name for them because it was deeded to us in the 40s or the 50s. I'm not
So
sure.
again, if we needed to save money, we could, let them go back to state, let them deal with it.
Good.
We're getting the historical society to take it
To
over.
take it over, right, so it's not a city.
Like you said, that would revert to the general fund at some point.
That fund balance of 186.6, it looks like we're projecting, is taxpayer dollars. That would come right back to the general fund.
When?
Whenever we come up with I guess we could do it now. But we have to, knowing that if something, well, for instance, the tree just fell on the building, so that's gonna have to be fixed, but that's an insurance problem.
It's an insurance problem.
But we could, by council decision, say, you know what, let's leave X amount of dollars in there, transfer back to the general fund taxpayers, knowing that if something comes up down the line with that building, assuming we don't give it back to the state, then the taxpayers then would be responsible to repair and maintain it going forward, providing the historical society doesn't take over.
What's the time frame for a decision from the historic?
So they are right now going through our collection to see what kind of, what it would take to manage a collection and what they could do there. So actually, this month and next month, they're gonna be just doing a little investigating. So we're hoping springtime, we could have come to council for some kind of agreement. But again, that's gonna be based on their assessment of our collection and what it actually would take them to manage it and costs.
And what's the estimated total cost for lifeguards?
About 55,000, what was it?
45 for Newton Watch.
Well, at least Russia's what our,
If we're looking at this where this seems to be going for this year, it is feasible as long as everybody is aware that we're still responsible for that building. But it is certainly feasible to lower the fund balance in that historical society back to the general fund to operate brush, leaves, and lifeguards. Knowing that we still would be on the hook to do something with that building. Obviously, we have insurance on it, but if there's a furnace or something that needs to go and the historical society won't sign an agreement to run it unless we put 50 grand into it. But I would maybe then not recommend transferring the total fund balance back to the general fund, leave 70 grand or whatever.
That seems like the most logical fund if we're going to go that route.
Because ultimately, if they take it over, that fund was going to go away.
Right, I remember that. But it's a 1-year fix. I mean, I think we all are there and here need to understand if we do it this way, it's a 1-year fix.
We have to fix revenue.
And then we have to fix
Whatever
revenue.
we're talking about, the issue, and I hesitate, but the short-term fix cannot distract us
Right.
from dealing with revenue.
It just buys us a little bit of time. Hopefully the paid parking thing will have a handle on or more information on.
Now, feedback from this representative group and pretty much everybody that I've talked to since we started this process. I mean, the silver lining here is the awareness and the discussion that's going on. But these are two very valuable services to the taxpayer. And I'm a lot more comfortable taking a flyer on a fund that's sitting there, that's a what-if fund, rather than setting a precedent of dipping into equipment reserves.
I think the historical fund is one.
And it's a way to recognize the importance to the taxpayer. We're talking about how spending taxpayer money.
Mhm.
It's a taxpayer fund. But we have to stay on millages, special assessments, Headley, whatever the hell it is. We have to deal with revenue. We've let it go too long. So that would be my proposal. Move this forward.
Question, the chiller here, can we classify that as equipment?
I've already been down this path.
Okay. I just wondered.
No,
Great
No.
question.
yep, I've already thought of that, because that equipment fund is called an internal service fund. It
It's like my
is,
stock fund for the fire department, yeah,
it's rates charged back to the city based on a state thing, and it's to build up. The question is, could we move $100,000 back to the general fund? I don't know, but I can certainly look into that.
But that one has a more
But the chiller,
obvious
no.
application to me.
well, if you go,
That one has a more direct application to me than the museum fund.
Me too,
Well, if you go through the CIP, it's gone in
3 years,
3 years.
Right.
unfortunately.
trucks are not cheap.
Well, no, that's why that equipment fund, one or two pieces of equipment and you're down below your minimum.
Yeah. Another part of the problem in the general fund, which is the millage. All the buildings, city buildings, parking lots, everything is in that fund. And we can't take money from the water and sewer fund to put a new roof on City Hall.
But to the point of reserves, I mean, we need more reserves. We're historically low on reserves.
Which means we need more revenue. I mean, it comes back around. So that's really what we have to figure out. I think.
But for a budget scenario for 2022, I'm not opposed to that historical fund.
Understanding it's a Band-Aid to get us where we need to be.
Correct.
Well, I like
Because
that.
I don't want to see lifeguards or brush cleanup go away either, but
And when we were looking at what to propose as cuts, we're looking at the city, what we have to do, essential services, maintenance, and what we provide on our own grounds. And one of the there's a theory out in local government that what you cut is first, let's say a service that's on a private property, right? You cut those first because you're serving a private property. It's not servicing public land. So that's why, leaf and brush is there. Recycling, same thing, right? That's just an idea. You want to focus first, contract on what you own, put in services and assets on what you own, and then expand it out toward what you don't own.
And those two were easily identifiable programs that you could look at in total.
And,
The rest of it, as we pointed out, is smeared across the entire budget.
And there's other things, you look at our zoning assessing, those are necessities. Look at clerk, elections, everything, almost everything else in that budget, aside from parks, is really, it's all essential. And police department, that's.
Place to trim is, get rid of 24/7 police protection. That's it.
I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
That would be a little sensitive.
That would be even more unpleasant than lifeguards. Quit buying equipment.
Can't do that.
Can't do that.
Well, I'm gonna make a proposal and we can chew on it for a minute. Given what we've talked about, a little bit on the beach, I say we get rid of the dock, eliminate the liability,
The raft.
the raft,
The raft.
sorry, the raft. Eliminate that responsibility. We've got hundreds of miles of beach around us. And me being the first responder, we maybe there's 2 or 3 calls a year up to Watershed's Point because kayakers are stupid you know, in the weather, they think they can go out and windsurf and stuff like that. And somewhere along the line, you gotta take responsibility for your kids. I mean, there's no calls for drowning or anything over at State Park, and there's how many hundreds of people go through there a year? But I would say we take what funds we need to take out of the Historical Society, keep our brush, keep our pickup, go with the budget we have proposed with the addition of the lifeguard and leaf pickup. And then we get into the topic of how we're gonna raise revenue in the coming year.
So you're suggesting don't cut anything and just transfer the funds?
Transfer the funds, don't cut anything. And then we, knowing that this is a Band-Aid to get us through the coming year. And we're gonna have to look at raising rates, raising something in the coming year.
So just to clarify, so in case there's a motion made, transfer the amount of money from the historical fund needed to cover lifeguards, brush and leaf pickup that were removed.
Correct.
It's about $100,000 according to the budget. So that leaves 85,000 as a.
Emergencies.
But I do think if we do that, because I think I'm in favor of doing that, but I think we do need to really be committed to figuring out how to not be in the same situation next year.
Well, so they're gonna be back here.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna lose something.
Yeah.
Well, one
so
of
I
the next
think
topics is revenue.
we
Got
just
to.
have
That
to
does
figure out
not
a
guarantee
way.
we won't lose something.
No,
Right.
but we have to be very committed to raising some more revenue in the next year, somehow do that.
Paid parking will probably come up January 17th as a topic of conversation. Look into a couple of different vendors. Yep, I've already looked at vendors and to look at the payback, return on investment, and how much money that could generate. And it could be substantial. When I actually presented to you on my revenue, I was assuming Petoskey was charging $1 an hour, but they're only charging 50 cents an hour. So my revenue assumptions might have been low. So
Well, and we also, I think we need to do that for sure, but we also need to look at some of the other ideas you set forward for revenue.
We talked about the contribution from adjoining townships.
From
I mean, we need to look at all of the above.
Yeah, yeah. I think so.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
You guys caught me off guard.
John, just clarification. So there would technically be no real need to get rid of the raft if we have lifeguards.
I still say get rid of the raft, eliminate that liability. They don't have to worry about.
What was that, our staff thing, suggestion? Rachel, Lynn? any-
If we're keeping the lifeguards. If we're keeping the lifeguards, there's no reason to remove the raft because there's no swim at your own risk with the raft, which would be the liability.
Beach is
So,
a fraction of what it used to be, so I mean, is there really a need for it?
It's the only place you can
probably
dive.
every child,
You
right,
need to
of
dive off it
passage
anymore,
to
right?
it and have the strength to get the courage to swim in the lake, yes. The raft is very important if we're gonna have lifeguards.
It's heavily
It's,
used too.
it's,
We anchor down there all the
it's
time.
definitely a sense of.
They have a liability.
On a budget, no, it doesn't, it doesn't add any more lifeguards either. No. So you're just keeping the same amount.
So we,
All right.
yeah, can you do your motion again, John, since I seconded it?
Make a motion to remove funds from the historical fund to our general fund and not cut any services.
And I'll second.
All right, roll call. John Leo,
Yes.
Al Dika,
Yes.
Matt Bulgara,
Yes.
Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
John Cox. We're back in action.
So you'll see that revised at the next council meeting.
So what'll happen now is those things will change. There's a couple things that were pointed to my attention that need correction. Then this whole thing will come back to you with a resolution to amend and adopt, amend 2021 and adopt 2022. Roll call vote, done. That will sum it up, but I would really like to, even if we didn't do a quarterly thing with the full council, which I would recommend, maybe a finance committee.
I like the idea of the full
I think it's a
council.
great idea.
We started a 6-month review, and I think at that first 6 months review, we talked about doing portable.
Right.
So we should absolutely do that.
Perfect.
And it should be full council and it should be a public meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Given the situation we're in, I think it'll make it easier for everybody out there and us.
And you.
And to offer up next time, come to him with questions. He really welcomes them. I've spent many hours with Nick trying to understand budgets and Headley and everything else. He welcomes the questions, so does Victor. Or us, call one of us.
I'm just gonna send you to Nick, so.
Follow up on that.
All right.
I
I tried.
tried the questions that I had over the last few days, and I always welcome questions, so I know we're a big part of the budget, so please come and see me. And I appreciate you guys asking the questions, so thank you.
We're all believers in transparency.
What's next on the agenda?
Bye-bye.
Council, open new business, anything?
Grounded into the ground tonight.
No, I just want to actually thank Kyle and his crew for some of the services given, not everybody hears what goes on in their own backyard, but we've had our own share of instances around here that aren't super public knowledge, but Kyle and his guys, for anybody that's questioning what he does around here, they do take care of us. So hats off to him and his crew.
You're on the chopping block next year, Kyle.
I know.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for thanking us.
It's great.
Really